Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you for being here. Hello, friends. I hope this finds you in good health and secure. Thank you for your practice. Thank you for liking and subscribing. Helps grow the Sangha on YouTube across the world. Welcome to all of you. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. We are talking about Nichiren's life as a man, and this book, a reprint of a previously out of print book by our friends at ForgottenBooks.com. This is a book that was published by Harvard Press back in 1916. So the scholarship trends goes from the 19th to the 20th century here, right? By this Japanese gentleman who was a professor, a doctor, and we're learning about Nichiren, of course, about Buddhism, but as a refreshing take on Nichiren, which isn't, for some reason, not that available online or in particular sects and so forth. A lot is discussed about the date of this and the date of that. The historical, like school, you learn the date of the Magna Carta signing and the Declaration of Independence and all of that. There's a lot of that about Nichiren available out there. But as to Nichiren the man, where he lived, how he lived, what would have motivated the way that he wrote his letters that we all have discussed many talks on the Go Show, right? Knowing a little bit more about the man and the situation gives us context for his impetus and his motivations in the different writings that he did, right? And how he propagated Shakyamuni's culminating teachings of the Lotus Sutra. I've recently, I've talked about this organization. This is a little bit away from this book, but just for a moment, about the Nichiren mandalas. There are 125 extant mandalas, holographs of them, actual inscribed by Nichiren mandalas, and they vary from the very beginning throughout his career and his development of his doctrines of practicing Shakyamuni's Lotus Sutra to the latter years where they took full form, sometimes referred to as Gohonzon, but you and I understand Gohonzon is in the mind, not the scroll, not the piece of paper, not that mandala. The mandala is our samsaric, if you will, physical world mirror or focal point to awaken that mental Gohonzon to our Buddha-ness, right? So let's get that squared. But this organization I've talked about before, it's called the Nichiren Mandala Workshop or something like that. They also have a bookstore on lulu.com, as we do, Threefold Lotus Kun bookstore. And they have several books outlining with photographs, black and white, of each of these mandalas, situating what collection they're in, who they suspect from historical documents actually the mandalas were created for. In some cases, whether or not they can attest to Nichiren's actual inscription of them, and where some might be in doubt, like a close disciple, but the 125 specifically are authenticated to be Nichiren's, and the mandala that we use is a reproduction, a digital reproduction of one of those latter mandalas. They also have done research on Nichiren's life, non-sectarian, That's one reason I like their resource, because it's not tainted by the agendas of organizations or sects or any of that. And once I complete this particular book, which is over 100 years old, it might be interesting to delve in. They have a couple of books. I think they're only available as ebooks, which I don't like reading on a monitor, so I may have to print them out or something. But I'm going to have a look at those, and with our patrons' donations, I'll endeavor to purchase each of those. And if there's some interesting information in those, and I've noticed there's some interest in this series now, maybe we'll go further and read more about the life of Nichiren, the man, so we can understand the context of his writings even a little bit more intimately, yes? So let me know how you feel about that. But, we've only just started this book, so maybe by the time we're done with this, that'll satisfy all our curiosities about Nichiren. Don't know. Let's get going here. All right. So where we left off, Shingon mysticism was denounced by him as a religion that was ruining the vitality of the nation. So we've already touched on the nationalistic fervor around Japanese culture, let alone the use of Buddhism as a political tool, right? And Nichiren's saying, cut that crap out. If you really want Japan to be great, then you should be practicing Buddhism correctly. So, yeah, not everybody wanted to hear that, right? So, here we go. Nichiren's third object of attack was a school of Buddhist monastic discipline. In the 12th century, a reaction against the corruption of the hierarchy took, with certain reforming leaders, the shape of enforcing a strict observance of the monastic rules. So, as often happens with things of various natures, but certainly when it comes to swaying the public mind, there's, because of all the corruption, and it becomes obvious that these sects are really working for the ruling families rather than the correctness of Buddhist practice, some leaders decided to go back to early teachings of Buddhism, all the way back to Hinayana and the Agama Sutras and so forth. And in those teaching periods, as we've discussed many times, Shakyamuni established a lot of rules, right? Precepts and rules for conduct, not because that was the way to practice enlightenment, but because that was the road to mastery of self, mind, and body, understanding how that works, that sometimes you have to restrict people's behavior in order for human beings to go, oh, I see what's happening in my head. Now I understand how to control myself or understand my mind, so on and so forth, right? So there was a return to that. Totally inappropriate for the time. People were more capable, but there was so much corruption that there was this pulling back. Well, we need to just control everybody, right? So, in the 12th century, a reaction against the corruption of the hierarchy took, with certain reforming leaders of Buddhist sects, the shape, not just Buddhist sects though, but in the government themselves, the shape of enforcing a strict observance of the monastic rules. They systematized the principles of Buddhist ethics from the standpoint of monastic discipline. So it wasn't just that they went back to earlier teachings. They went to the earlier teachings to get a set of rules that they could then apply to the society of a modern society, well, medieval, of Japan. So it was a hybrid, right? This school was called Ritsu. You may have heard of the Ritsu, yes? Or translated as the disciplinary school, and developed a one-sided rigorism which manifested in the course of time the evils of formalism. Formalism being observing all kinds of rules as the practice itself instead of thinking in more deeply. And he writes in this way because this isn't new to society, and nor is Buddhism any particularly new flavor of formalism. This is in the samurai code, the Bushido. It's in democracy. It's in republicans. It's in whatever. There's a falling to the rules without understanding why. Always, as Shakyamuni pointed out, the danger of forgetting that there's meaning behind our acts, that it's not just in the words, it's not just in the rules, it's not in just you behave this way, dress with a suit and tie, and therefore you are something. The suit and tie represents something that most people don't give pause to even consider or think about. They're wearing the armor, right? Fake it till you make it. There you are. Training in morality under rules cultivated a tendency to practice virtue merely for the sake of individual salvation. If I follow all the rules and I wear the specific suit and tie and I go to the right meetings and I talk to use the right words, then I'm it. It's such a superficial way of living life, and yet in our modern age, which starts with the time of Nichiren, it's rampant. It's everywhere. In many ways, if you look at the world situation in separate countries and the leadership and the way they conduct themselves, look at North Korea. I mean, really think. Is there much difference between that and medieval insanity? Right? We look at medieval times and we think, those barbarians. But, the tools have changed, the technologies have changed, but the mental confines of the people, man, it's rampant. It's everywhere. That's crazy, really. Okay. Self-satisfaction easily grew into self-conceit, which often tempted the adept in these extraordinary ways of life to make his attainments the means of attracting popular admiration and reverence. Look, I haven't spoken in a year. Oh, I must be a saint, right? This kind of false equivocation simply because we follow the rules. Therefore, we must be extra special. But do you know what the rules are supposed to discover? What you're supposed... Oh, no, doesn't matter. Right? I've ticked all the boxes. Moreover, the slavish and formal observance of disciplinary rules, which had originally been intended for Hindu monks, right? Because Hindu monks were all over the place. Still are. This magical thinking that no reasonable mind would conceive of or adhere to, no rational thinking, all irrational, and banking on it. So yeah, that's why there were so many rules earlier on, because we had to take these Hindu monks and teach them that everything's going on in their mind, not in the air with sacred flying elephants and, just get real, brother. Yeah? Okay. So, aroused antagonism in those who adhered to Japanese ideas and customs. Nichiren, as a nationalist, I think this author would say, because Nichiren was very concerned about the state of the people of Japan. I don't think that makes him a nationalist in the use of the word today, but 100 years ago, yeah, he would seem like a nationalist. Remember, this was before the Second World War, when nationalism took on a far different meaning vis-a-vis National Socialism in Germany. Yeah? That changed the meaning of the word. Nationalism prior to that, although it was just as strong a sentiment, was really about raising the pride and pride of place amongst the world as a dignified right? Distinctive quality of a certain people's culture, nation. But I won't argue with you if you point out that that also drove the wars between the Mongols and Japan and China and so forth. Nationalism can become very military, militant. So what I'm trying to say is that although that certainly existed in Japan at the time, I mean, ruled by force, samurai, I'm not an idiot, but I think for Nichiren, his nationalistic fervor was in raising the minds of the people of Japan toward enlightenment. That he saw the Japanese as uniquely positioned after Dengyo, right, to have had the answer of Shakyamuni's teachings of the Lotus Sutra in their hands, and they let it slip through their fingers. And so he wants to bring them back to that critical understanding and enlightenment, and with that, prevent wars and disruptions. And so really anti-militaristic. So you see where I'm saying you can call him a nationalist, but it's from a non-militaristic point of view, right? So Nichiren, as a nationalist and an advocate of a broader Buddhism, could not fail to protest vigorously against the Ritsu Buddhists. Falling into formalism, they were heading straight to war. They didn't understand the enlightenment of Buddhism. He called them traitors to their country. Do you see the nationalism there? Traitors to themselves. That's far different than national fervor to go to war with other cultures and peoples. He was saying the war is internal and it's happening here in our very people. So I'm not sure if nationalism is the right term, but let's just understand that. The introduction of a new school, Buddhist school, called Zen, formerly in China known as Chan, right? Or the meditative school, increased the religious confusion. Here's another. So we have the formalists here, all running back to rules. And then we have these ethereal group now saying, let's just withdraw from everything and move into our minds, which isn't the goal of Buddhism, right? A refresher, the goal of Buddhism is to live this life fully. There's no retreat. There's more of an involvement, a deeper understanding and perception of, no retreat to some other thing. Zen was a simple method of training intuitive insight by the practice of meditation, which aimed at revealing the primordial purity of the cosmic soul in each individual soul. Okay, he said it twice in the same sentence. And how many times must I remind all of us? Shakyamuni's primary objective when he first started, yes, in Hinayana, through the Agamas, through early Mahayana, all of his teachings, repeats constantly, there's no such thing as an abiding soul, a bag of bob, a box of Betty. That's just insanity. That's just magical, irrational, unreasonable thinking. Shakyamuni was very much bound up with our earthly existence, the real. This is so amazing. You should be more amazed by this than all of your fanciful imaginations. Spend time here in it and develop this as your life, your opportunity, all your amazement. Why invest in something that's completely unreal? You're missing this. Shakyamuni constantly that was his main refrain. Yeah? That's what enlightenment is about. being fully present, not investing in this magical, irrational thinking. So here it is in Zen, as though it's something attainable. I want to get to the primordial Sylvain. I'm being it. I am being Sylvain. Sylvainess. But that's just a label for what I am. I'm not Sylvain. I'm not Sylvainness. Because the more I invest into that name, the more I'm conjuring a box of Sylvain. But I'm not that. I'm a process moving through time. I have a momentum of karmic energy. Spend time experiencing that, and the label Sylvain is just a convenience for samsaric conversation. It's not who I am. But that's not a primordial thing. That's something that's happening right here and now. All right. Riddle-like questions were given by the master, which the disciples had to solve sitting in meditation by avoiding the usual process of reasoning and trying to discover an unexpected light by a flash of illumination. This new school of mental training and spiritual drill commended itself to the minds of military men, because they like that. They got rules and they've got, this spiritualness that they can. The samurai loved this, right? That when they retired, they went to Satori. They went and secluded themselves to find this core self, right? And they found it in a very beneficial exercise for keeping their composure and preparing for resolute action. Samurai woke up every day believing it was their last day. That's the Bushido code. Today I die. And if I don't, then I live to die another day. I mean, it's a very bleak. So to have some spiritual practice that says there's something connecting all of these days that you can entreat kind of kept them sane, yeah? But it's not Buddhism. It's Zen. Not only did Zen reject systematic thought on religion and ethics, but it induced those robust but rude men to take pride in self-assertion and often to run to an excess of individualism. I have attained. I am superior. What could be less Buddhist? Yeah? It's all built on ego. Nichiren saw in this new method of Buddhist meditation a rebellion against the genuine Buddhism of the Lotus, as well as a fruitful source of rampant selfishness, the very opposite of Shakyamuni's teachings. Devil was the name given by Nichiren to the Zenists, and the devils were threatening the national integrity of Japan and the authority of true Buddhism. So there you have it. This is the situation Nichiren grows up in. He's very politically involved, but only through the lens of Buddhism. And as we've discussed before, Buddhism, being the religion of the day, was concomitant in the governance of the Japanese people. It's hard to separate, and still that culture came from, remember, emperors. So the spiritualness of leadership allowed for all of these machinations of control using Buddhist rhetoric, but not practicing Buddhism. And Nichiren saw this and felt very alone in seeing this so clearly that he took on the mantle of Bodhisattva Jogyo, right? The leader of the Bodhisattvas of the earth. Shingon occultism, ruining the nation, Ritsu Methodism, betraying the country to foreign customs, Amita Buddhism, Nembutsu, leading people to the hells of suffering, and Zen meditation alluring men to devilish pride, these four were declared by Nichiren to be the greatest curse of the age. The violent antagonism of Nichiren was due to his exclusive resolve in the teachings of the scripture Lotus, as representing the genuine and deepest truth of Shakyamuni's teachings of Buddhism. Now we shall see why and how he arrived at this conviction and what the Lotus of Truth is. Chapter 2. Where are we time-wise? Well, we can get into Chapter 2 a little bit. So Chapter 2 is Nichiren's birth, studies, and conversion, the Lotus of Truth. Nichiren was born on the seacoast of the southeastern corner of Japan, in a fishing village surrounded on the north by undulating hills and washed by the dark blue waves of the Pacific Ocean on the south. Tidal waves have washed away the part of the seacoast where his father's house stood, and today the spot is pointed out in the depths of the wonderfully clear water on the rocky bottom of the sea, where lotus flowers were said to have bloomed miraculously at the birth of the wonderful boy. So there's some folklore, right? His father was a fisherman, and doubtless the boy was often taken out on the father's boat and must have enjoyed the clear sky and pure air of the open sea. When, in latter years, during his retirement in the mountains, a follower sent him a bunch of seaweed to eat, the old hermit wept as he called to his mind early memories of the seaweeds, which are indeed a charming sight as they are seen through the transparent water of the area of his birth, yeah? And we read that in the Gosho, Nichiren's own recounting. Far away from the effeminating air of the imperial capital, far away from the turmoils and agitations of the dictator's residence, the boy grew up in the fresh and invigorating atmosphere of a seaside village, in the midst of unadorned nature, wooden hills, green trees, blue waters, and sandy beaches. The inspiration of nature and the effect of association with the simple, sturdy people are manifest in each step of Nichiren's later career, in his thoughts and in his deeds. The new light was to come out of the east for the salvation of latter days, Mappo. This prophetic zeal of Nichiren is in large measure to be attributed to his idea about his birth and to the surroundings of his early life. So you can understand a boy growing up with such an intense relationship to samsara, the earth, fish, the ocean, the land, the bucolic environment. That never leaves. That's the seed of appreciation for one's environment and one's relation to one's environment. So this follows Nichiren throughout his life, right? In 1233, when the boy was 11 years old, his parents sent him to a monastery on the hill known as Kiyozumi, the clear luminosity, near his home. The reason is not given, but it was in no way an exceptional or extraordinary step. In those days, many a father did the same. They had to make a choice amongst their children. Are all of you going to stay here and work for me and take on the tradition of keeping the family alive with what we, our business, our efforts? Or can we afford for one of you to leave and become educated? Learn the skills of language and reading and writing and philosophy, right? How to live life well. Not everyone could afford to do that. And that was a big, major decision for the family. Although he says father because we have a very a patriarchal society here, right? Still to this day, Japan. Whether from motives of piety or for the sake of the boy's future career, right? It depended on the piety of the father. Maybe the father didn't respect religious or monastic practices and stuff. Be a fisherman like me. Or maybe he was more earthbound in his appreciation for the grandeur of life, that he had the opportunity to be a fisherman, right? Everybody's attitude is different. But for whatever reasons, the decision was made for Nichiren to go to school, go to study. The peaceful and innocent days of the boy's novice passed. He was made an ordained monk when he was 15 years old, and the religious name given by his master was Rencho, or Lotus Eternal. Wow. You can see a pattern for Nichiren, right? This earthbound, spiritually awakened nature and self, the relationship, goes to learn language and religious Buddhist study, and he's given the name Lotus Eternal. Oh, man. It's written in the cards, you might say, right? Doubts grew with learning because too many tenets and practices were included in the Buddhist religions of his day, and the keen-sighted youth was never satisfied with the incongruous mixture in the religion he was taught. Because Buddhism isn't a religion, and he saw that very early on, that there were these religious overtones being pushed into what he was obviously reading, texts of Shakyamuni's sermons and teachings. And there was an incongruity, right? Many of you have experienced the same thing. I know I did. We get started with certain sects or groups, and then things just seem to just ring out of tune, right? It's like playing a guitar and the string, it does something, and okay, I'll go along with that for a little while, but I need to know more. And this is what happened with Nichiren. So no different than you and I. My wish had always been, quote unquote, he tells us in his later writings, that's from Nichiren's works, from Kato, Tokyo in 1904, page 1770, to sow the seeds for the attainment of Buddhahood and to escape the fetters of births and deaths. This constant process that we're attached to, craving, hanging on to. Can we just experience the totality of the amazing life process without being glued to the footsteps, right? For this purpose, I once practiced, according to the custom of most fellow Buddhists, the method of repeating the name of Amida Buddha. So he got caught up in the Nembutsu. That's what was most popular. Putting resolve in his redeeming power, this otherness. But he knew, it didn't take him long to understand, that's not what the teachings of Shakyamuni are. I'm not supposed to pray for this special individual in a cloud somewhere to go after I die to some pure place and have a whole new what? That's irrational, right? But since doubt had begun to arise in my mind as to the truth of that belief, I committed myself to a vow that I would study all the branches of Buddhism known in Japan and learn fully what their diverse teachings were, end quote. Which is what we emulate. We emulate that behavior of Nichiren. We resolve our doubts how? by study. And then we get our own personal insights through that study. And that brings us back to center. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, yes? His distress of mind was, however, not over a merely intellectual problem, but was a deeply Buddhist practice crisis. And indeed, the young monk was then passing through so violent a struggle of conversion that he at last fell into a swoon, following a fit of spitting blood. Never read that before. It is said that during this swoon he saw in vision Kokuzo, the deity of wisdom. So he got a profound insight, in other words. The poetics of these. Anyway, this happened when Rensho was 17 years old. Still a very young man. And in the next year, we find him studying under a teacher of Amida Buddhism in Kamakura, the residence of the commissioners. Oh, wow, at a very young age, he's still a teenager. He's now studying directly with the elite, also Nembutsu. But this gives him, you see, by traveling through different temples, he gets access to different texts and scriptures, you would say, in the West, right? As he uses the word here. And so even though he's following the program of the day, he's deeply concerned with the path of Buddhism as prescribed by Shakyamuni, and not so involved with, he's truth-seeking, right? For himself and for Buddhism. But it's simply for his own peace of mind, you might say, right? The uneasiness of the young monk was not allayed, and his quest of truth was not satisfied by the teachers who were accessible in the provinces. He wasn't learning anything new, and he knew what they were doing it didn't ring true. Rensho then went to Mount Hiei, the greatest center of Buddhist learning and discipline, where he stayed from 1243 to 1253, a decade, pursuing a varied course of study and training. Because as you'll recall, in Mount Hiei, that was the center of Dengyo's revival of Tendai to the truth of the Lotus Sutra. Rensho, the Lotus practitioner, right? So there were a lot of documents and libraries of texts that, although they weren't being respected in his day, were there for him to study in Mount Hiei. During these years, he also visited other centers of Buddhism where special branches of Buddhism were taught and practiced, and extended his study even to Shinto and Confucianism. The result of all this study and investigation are shown not only in the erudition of his later writings, but in the comprehensive breadth of his doctrine. Right? We were impressed by that when I read through all the Go shows. There's just this depth of understanding and ability to quote not only Shakyamuni texts, translated texts, but the text of great Chinese Confucianism and the emperor stories and the histories of India, China, Pakchi, Korea, and Japan. Nichiren was the consummate scholar, incredible vocabulary of the history of Buddhist and non-Buddhist thoughts and how they intermingled and how Buddhism traveled. Nichiren was unexcelled, right? But this all started from his youth, his curiosity, his wanting to know definitively, because things just didn't sound right. He couldn't just follow. Nichiren wasn't so much a follower as a leader. And there you have it from his childhood on, yes? fearless in a way. And I think growing up really involved with nature, going out in the dark in the early morning hours in a little boat out into the Pacific Ocean so that you could eat later that day and feed your family, those are some courageous acts that folks living in a city would hardly understand, right? But the range, and we'll continue, but the range of his studies never diverted him from the central problem. What is the true form and unique truth of Buddhism? Why Buddhism? Why are we doing all this stuff? What is the central, the main, the gist, the core of this practice? Why are we doing this? What's this about? Siddhartha knew, but somehow over time, right, thousands of years, and different elocutioners, all serving their own agendas, it tends to get lost, yeah? So that's what he was after. On the contrary, as he progressed in knowledge, the conviction gradually grew stronger in his mind that the truth is one, and that the essence of the Buddhist practice, nay, of human life, is not manifold. Do you see that? It's interesting the way he writes this, because he's really encapsulating that formation of Nichiren's thoughts, right? That the more he studied, the more he became convinced that everything's pointing to one thing, and it's not just Buddhism, it's the way of living life that is the topic of Buddhism, and there is only one way to do it correctly. There's several ways to enjoy samsara and play in life. Absolutely. But if you're seeking spiritual enlightenment, a knowing, a knowledge of being, it's singular. It can't be manifold. There has to be a core understanding of life from which everything else emanates. And it became more and more obvious to him this had to be so. Certainly within the teachings he was reading, not just Buddhists, remember, Confucianism, Taoism, all of these other schools, they were all trying to point to this one essential truth. Quote, I had gone to many centers of the religion of Buddhism, he says in reminiscence. During those 20 years in the quest of Buddhist truth, the final conclusion I arrived at was that the truth of Buddhism must be one in essence. Many people lose themselves in the labyrinth of learning and studies through thinking that every one of the diverse branches might help to the attainment of Buddhist ideals. End quote. Wherein then did the young zealot find the unique truth? Fierce internal struggles, wide study, and prolonged thought brought this sincere seeker after truth to final conviction that the scripture, the Lotus of Truth, Myoho Renge Kyo, was the deposit of the unique truth, the book in which the Lord Buddha had revealed his real entity and on which the great master Dengyo had based his religious practice and institutions. The name Rensho was now exchanged for Nichiren, which means sun lotus. Now the sun is deeply ingrained in the Japanese psyche, right? The goddess of the sun is the maker of Japan. So for him to be the sun lotus is to be the sun of Japan with the enlightenment of the Lotus teaching. Yeah, that's quite nationalist, isn't it? But I would argue still not in a military way, in a seeking of the truth way, that Japan could be the shining light to expose the whole world to that essence of truth in Buddhism. This is very much, as I've read all those Goshos with you, the spirit of Nichiren, right? You can sense it. So no wonder he takes on that name. The sun, the source of universal illumination, and the lotus, the symbol of purity and perfection, were his ideals. Well, he said it even better than I tried to, yeah? Nichiren's firm belief was that the lotus of truth was not only the perfect culmination of Buddhist truth, but the sole key to the rescue or the emancipation of all beings in the latter day of the generation. Thus, all other branches of Buddhism, which deviated from the principle of the exclusive adoration of this scripture, were denounced as untrue to Buddha, as we have already seen in Nichiren's condemnation of the prevalent forms of Buddhism. Nichiren's idea was the restoration of Buddhism to its original purity and to the principles propounded by Dengyo. But what he understood by restoration was quite different from our modern idea of historical criticisms. The truths are eternal, but the method should be a simple one, available for all, especially for men of the latter days, and without regard to differences among them in wisdom and virtue. These convictions of Nichiren had a complicated background of philosophical thought in accord with the general trend of Buddhist speculation and as a result of his learning. But all these doctrines and arguments were fused by the white heat of his resolve and zeal. That is, he simplified the whole practice of Buddhism to an easy method, that of uttering the sacred title of the scripture. And there we will continue in the next video. Pretty entertaining read. It has some insights. Doesn't tell us how he shaved in the morning or any of those particular habits, but certainly construction of a vivid picture of how Nichiren came to his own awakening of the practice of Buddhism. Still, some words like salvation used. It's a very westernization, even 100 years or so ago. But, he was studying at Harvard. He was speaking at Harvard. So he was confronting the Western idioms as he spoke about Nichiren's life. So here it is in print. Nothing new, far less influence than just a few decades earlier with H. Kern's translation of the Lotus Sutra. A lot of Western religious terms in that. And still the meaning comes through. That's the most exciting thing, I think, in our research of academic archaeology and understanding and historical depth of our Buddhist practice, yeah? Anyway, I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. And I see it in your views. A lot of people seem interested, at least. And I'm happy that we're going through this book. And as I said, we'll do some more talks on Nichiren. A little new format in this video, transitioning to a new year. So I hope that's all good. Let me know your thoughts on that. Please share. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Or go to Patreon and help support this channel. All the videos are there as well. There's the audio podcast you can download. Anyway, you have all those links. Have a splendid day. Enjoy your life, every moment of it. And with that in mind, stay healthy. Be kind to yourself, and I'll see you in the next one. Namo Myo Renge Kyo. Myo Renge Kyo.